The dust-caked tears streamed down Willow O'Brien's face as she watched her husband's body being lowered into the unforgiving New Mexico earth, taking with it 5 years of marriage and all the promises of the future they'd planned together. April 1882 had brought more than spring flowers to Hatchita. It had brought typhoid fever, claiming Thomas along with a dozen others from their small community. The cemetery sat on a gentle slope overlooking the town, giving Willow a clear view of what remained of her life, a weathered wagon filled with everything they'd owned, parked beside the only home she'd known since leaving Missouri as a bride. In 3 days, that home would belong to someone else. The bank had made that abundantly clear when she'd begged for more time to pay the mortgage Thomas had taken out to expand their small mercantile business. Mrs. O'Brien, Pastor Mitchell said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder as the last of the mourners dispersed, leaving her alone beside the fresh mound of earth. "You're welcome to stay with my wife and me until you decide what to do next." Willow wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her black mourning dress collecting the dust stirred up by the persistent wind. "Thank you, Pastor, but I've made my decision. My sister's in Santa Fe. I'll leave tomorrow." The pastor's face creased with concern. "That's nearly 200 miles. You can't make that journey alone." "I have no choice," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. At 28, Willow was no stranger to hardship. She'd helped Thomas build their life here from nothing. Now, with nothing again, she would have to rebuild elsewhere. Dawn broke cold and clear the following morning as Willow hitched Thomas's horses, Beau and Lady, to the wagon. She'd spent the night loading everything of value, bolts of fabric from the mercantile, household goods, Thomas's tools, and a small lockbox containing the pitiful sum that remained of their savings. Enough, perhaps, to start over in Santa Fe if her sister could help her find work. As she cinched the final strap on the harness, a deep voice called from behind her. "That left rear wheel won't make it 10 miles. Willow turned to see a tall man approaching, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with the easy, rolling gait of someone who'd spent most of his life on horseback. "I beg your pardon," she said, straightening her back. "Your wheel," he repeated, nodding toward the wagon. "The rim's cracked. It'll split the first time you hit a decent rut." He stepped closer, and Willow could now see his face tanned from the sun, with lines around eyes that were startlingly blue against his weathered skin. He wasn't young, maybe mid-30s, with a neatly trimmed beard flecked with gray. "I don't have money for repairs," Willow admitted, hating the desperation in her voice. The stranger knelt beside the wheel, running his fingers along the wooden rim. "Where you headed?" "Santa Fe," he whistled low. "Long journey for a woman alone." Willow stiffened. "I don't have much choice, Mr. Quentin Ames," he replied, standing and dusting off his hands. "Most folks just call me Quinn." "Well, Mr. Ames, I appreciate your concern, but I need to get moving." Quinn looked from the wagon to the horses and back to Willow. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite read, not pity exactly, but a sort of understanding. "I'm headed north myself," he said after a moment. "Planning to pick up work driving cattle to Colorado. Santa Fe's on my way." Willow narrowed her eyes. "Are you offering to escort me?" "I'm offering to fix your wheel first," he replied, removing his hat and running a hand through dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. "Then we can discuss the journey." 3 hours later, Quinn had not only repaired the wheel but had gone over the entire wagon, reinforcing joints and axles with the skilled hands of someone who'd spent years on the trail. He refused the cup of coffee Willow offered, but accepted a biscuit from her dwindling provisions. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, watching as he secured the last of her belongings under a tarp. Quinn chewed thoughtfully before answering. I buried my wife and son 10 years ago. Cholera. There wasn't anyone to help us when we needed it. He shrugged as if that explained everything. The road to Santa Fe can be dangerous. Bandits. Apaches sometimes, though they're mostly on the reservations now. Weather. Bad water. Willow felt a chill despite the warming day. You're not making a compelling case for this journey. For the first time, a ghost of a smile crossed Quinn's face. Just saying you shouldn't make it alone. By noon, they were on the road north, Quinn riding his sturdy bay gelding alongside Willow's wagon. They spoke little at first, the miles passing in a silence broken only by the creak of the wagon, the steady clop of hooves, and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Willow studied her companion when she thought he wasn't looking. Quentin Ames wore his years comfortably, like the well-broken boots on his feet. His clothes were clean but worn a simple cotton shirt, leather vest, sturdy pants tucked into his boots. The revolver on his hip seemed more tool than weapon, though she noted he wore it with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. "You're not from Hatchita," she said finally, breaking the silence. "No, madam, just passing through." Quinn adjusted his hat against the sun. Been working ranches between Texas and Arizona for the past few years. Before that, Colorado. And before that, Quinn glanced at her, something guarded in his expression. Virginia. Long time ago. The way he said, it made Willow think of the war. Still a raw memory for many despite the 17 years since its end. They made camp that evening beside a small stream, Quinn insisting they stop, while there was still enough light to properly settle the horses and prepare a meal. He built a small fire and surprised Willow by producing a rabbit he'd shot during a brief stop earlier in the day. "You planning to stay in Santa Fe?" he asked as they sat beside the fire, the rabbit turning on a makeshift spit. Willow stared into the flames. "I don't know. My sister's there with her husband. They might help me find work, at least until I can decide what's next." "What did you do in Hatchita?" "My husband and I ran a mercantile. Before that, I taught school for a while back in Missouri." Willow pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the desert night's chills settled around them. "What about you? Where are you headed after Santa Fe?" Quinn poked at the fire, sending sparks into the darkness. "Thought I might try Colorado again. There's good money in the cattle drives to Pueblo, and I know some folks there." "You've been moving a long time," Willow observed. "Suppose I have," he acknowledged, turning the rabbit to cook evenly. "Never found a reason to stay in one place too long." The next morning dawned overcast, the promise of rain heavy in the air. They broke camp quickly, Quinn keeping a careful eye on the darkening sky as they continued northward. "We should make Fort Craig by nightfall if we push," he said, studying the road ahead. "Better to be behind walls if this storm turns bad." Willow nodded, already feeling the first few droplets on her face. She clicked her tongue, urging the horses to a slightly faster pace. The rain began in earnest an hour later, fat drops quickly turning to sheets of water that reduced visibility to mere yards. The wagon lurched over suddenly slick terrain, the trail becoming treacherous with mud. Quinn rode closer, occasionally reaching out to steady the wagon when it slid dangerously. "There's an old line shack about a mile east," he shouted over the downpour. "Used to belong to the Cunningham spread. Might still be standing." Willow nodded, her hands tight on the reins as she struggled to keep the horses calm in the storm. Quinn guided them off the main trail and across open country, the wagon bouncing and sliding alarmingly with each dip in the terrain. The line shack appeared suddenly through the curtain of rain, a small, weathered structure that had clearly seen better days, but was still standing. Quinn dismounted in one fluid motion and rushed to help Willow down from the wagon seat, his strong hand steadying her as her feet touched the muddy ground. "Get inside," he instructed, already turning to unhitch the horses. "I'll take care of them." Willow pushed open the door to find the shack dusty, but intact, a single room with a small stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and what might once have been a bunk built against one wall. She immediately set about clearing away cobwebs and dust, grateful to find a small stack of firewood beside the hearth. Quinn appeared in the doorway minutes later, water streaming from his hat and coat. "Horses are under the lean-to out back with my gelding," he reported, removing his dripping hat. "Your wagon's secure as I can make it." Willow nodded her thanks, already working to start a fire. Outside, the storm intensified, rain drumming on the roof while wind whistled through the cracks in the walls. Quinn shrugged out of his wet coat and hung it near the door before kneeling beside her at the hearth. "Here," he said, gently taking the flint from her shaking hands. "Let me." His fingers brushed hers, warm despite the chill, and Willow found herself suddenly aware of how close they were in the small space. Quinn struck the flint expertly, coaxing a flame from the kindling and carefully feeding it until the fire caught properly. "Thank you," she said, moving back to give him space. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there today." Quinn glanced up at her, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "You'd have managed. You strike me as someone who's faced worse than a storm." Willow thought of the past week, of Thomas's rapid decline, of standing alone at his grave, of the banker's unsympathetic expression as he'd explained the terms of her husband's debt. "Perhaps," she conceded. They ate a simple meal of hardtack and jerky from Quinn's provisions, neither wanting to venture into the continuing storm to retrieve more from the wagon. The fire drove back the worst of the chill, but Willow still found herself shivering as night deepened. Without comment, Quinn removed his blanket from his saddlebags and offered it to her. When she hesitated, he said simply, "I've slept in worse conditions, Mrs. O'Brien." "Willow," she corrected him, accepting the blanket. "If we're to travel together, you might as well use my given name." A slight smile touched Quinn's lips. "Willow, then." She settled on the floor near the fire, arranging the blankets as comfortably as possible. Quinn positioned himself on the opposite side of the hearth, his back against the wall, legs stretched toward the warmth. "How long have you been on your own, Quinn?" she asked, the darkness making it easier to ask personal questions. There was a long silence, and Willow thought perhaps he'd fallen asleep. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Since '65. Came home from the war to find my family farm burned. Union raiders. My parents had moved west with my sister's family. I followed, but by the time I found them in Missouri, cholera had swept through the settlement. Your wife and son," Willow remembered, "and my parents. My sister survived." He poked at the fire. "She's in California now." "I'm sorry," Willow said, the words feeling inadequate for such loss. Quinn nodded, acknowledging her sympathy without commenting further. "You should get some sleep. Storm might break by morning, and we've got ground to cover." Willow closed her eyes, listening to the rain and the occasional shifting of Quinn as he kept watch through the night. Despite the circumstances, she felt safer than she had in days. The storm had indeed passed by morning, leaving behind a world washed clean and sparkling in the early light. They set out again, the trail muddier but passable, the air fresh and cool after the rain. Fort Craig's about 4 hours ahead if the trail's not washed out, Quinn informed her as they picked their way carefully along the rutted track. "We can resupply there and get better information about conditions further north." Willow nodded, her thoughts drifting to what awaited her in Santa Fe. Her sister Caroline had married a merchant with political connections in the territorial government. Their letters had grown less frequent over the years as their lives diverged, Willow in her small-town mercantile and Caroline in increasingly refined society. "You're quiet this morning," Quinn observed, bringing his horse alongside the wagon. "Just thinking about my sister," Willow admitted. "It's been 5 years since I've seen her." "People change," Quinn said, his tone neutral. "Yes, they do." Willow flicked the reins, urging the horses over a particularly muddy stretch. "Sometimes I wonder if I know her at all anymore." They reached Fort Craig by midday, the adobe walls of the military installation rising from the landscape like an island of civilization in the wilderness. Quinn helped Willow arrange for supplies while he gathered information about the trail ahead. They took a meal in the fort's small canteen, Willow conscious of curious glances from the soldiers and civilians who passed their table. "Word is there's been trouble north of Socorro," Quinn told her as they finished their food. "Not Indians. White men deserters, maybe, or just outlaws hitting travelers along the trail." Willow felt her stomach tighten. "What sort of trouble?" "Robberies mostly. A couple killings." Quinn's expression was grim. "There's a wagon train leaving for Santa Fe tomorrow morning. Might be safer to join them." "How much longer would that take?" Willow asked, thinking of her dwindling funds. 2, maybe 3 days more than going direct. They'll have to move at the pace of their slowest wagon. Willow weighed her options, torn between safety and expediency. "What would you do?" Quinn studied her face for a long moment. "If I were traveling alone, I'd take my chances on the direct route, but with you and a wagon load of your possessions." He shook his head. "The wagon train's the wiser choice." "I'm not afraid, Quinn," Willow said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "And I trust your judgment. If you think we can make it safely on our own, then that's what we'll do." Something flickered in Quinn's eyes, respect, perhaps, or simple acknowledgement of her courage. "We'll leave at first light," he decided, "but we'll be cautious. No unnecessary stops, no fires at night unless we're well off the trail." They departed Fort Craig the next morning as promised, the sun still below the horizon as they passed through the fort's gates and turned north toward Socorro. Quinn rode ahead, scouting the trail, occasionally circling back to check on Willow's progress. The terrain grew more rugged as they continued, the wagon jolting over rocky stretches where flash floods had carved new channels across the trail. By midday, they had entered a narrow valley flanked by steep ridges, the trail threading between rocky outcroppings that cast long shadows across their path. "I don't like this," Quinn said, dropping back to ride beside the wagon. "Too easy for an ambush." Willow scanned the ridgelines nervously. "Should we turn back?" "Too late for that. We're better off pushing through." Quinn checked his revolver, then reached into his saddlebag for a rifle that he handed to Willow. "You know how to use this." "Thomas taught me," she said, accepting the weapon. "Though I've never fired at anything but targets." Quinn nodded grimly. "Let's hope it stays that way." They continued through the valley, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Willow found herself holding her breath each time they rounded a bend, half expecting to find the road blocked by bandits. The attack, when it came, was swift and terrifying. 2 riders appeared suddenly on the trail ahead, rifles raised, while a third man emerged from behind a boulder to their right. "That's far enough," called the lead rider, a gaunt man with a filthy beard. "Step down from that wagon, lady, and nobody gets hurt." Quinn had already drawn his revolver, his expression cold. "Ride on, friend. We've got nothing worth dying over." The bandit laughed, an ugly sound. "I'll be the judge of that. Now get your hands up before I put a hole in you." Willow clutched the rifle, her heart hammering in her chest. She saw Quinn shift slightly in his saddle, positioning himself between her and the outlaws. Last chance, Quinn said, his voice dangerously quiet. Ride away. The bandit's response was to cock his rifle. In the instant that followed, several things happened almost simultaneously. Quinn fired. The bandit tumbled from his saddle, and the man behind the boulder sent a bullet whistling past Willow's head. Down, Quinn shouted, already turning his horse to present a smaller target. Willow dropped to the wagon seat, raising the rifle and aiming at the second rider, who was now trying to control his panicking horse while bringing his weapon to bear on Quinn. She squeezed the trigger, the recoil jolting through her arms. The shot went wide, but it was enough to further spook the outlaw's horse, which reared and threw its rider to the ground. Quinn had dismounted and was exchanging fire with the man behind the boulder. Willow heard a cry of pain and saw the outlaw stagger into view, clutching his shoulder. The fallen rider was scrambling for his dropped weapon, and without thinking, Willow fired again, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from his reaching hand. "Don't," she warned, surprised at the steadiness in her voice. The wounded outlaw raised his good arm in surrender. "Don't shoot, we give up." Quinn approached cautiously, his revolver trained on the injured man. "Toss that pistol over here," he ordered the second man, who complied with shaking hands. "You killed Pete," the wounded man said accusingly, looking at his companion lying motionless in the dirt. "He made his choice," Quinn replied without sympathy. He collected the outlaw's weapons, then secured them with their own belts, binding their hands behind their backs. "What now?" Willow asked, still holding the rifle at the ready. Quinn looked down the trail, considering. "Soccero's still a good day's ride. We can't take them with us, and I'm not inclined to execute men who have surrendered, even vermin like these." After a moment's deliberation, Quinn retrieved a canteen from his saddlebag and placed it on the ground near the outlaws. "The army patrols this route every few days. You might survive until they find you." He mounted his horse, gesturing for Willow to get the wagon moving. "Or you might not. Either way, if I ever see you again, I won't be so merciful." They traveled in tense silence for several miles, both scanning constantly for signs of further trouble. Willow's hands shook as she held the reins, the reality of what had just happened finally catching up to her. "You did well back there," Quinn said eventually, riding close beside the wagon. "Not many would keep their head in a situation like that." "I've never shot at a person before," Willow replied, her voice unsteady. "I don't know if I could have actually hit him if he hadn't stopped." "Sometimes the threat is enough," Quinn acknowledged, "but don't doubt yourself. When it comes down to your life or theirs, you do what you have to do." Willow studied Quinn's profile, wondering how many times he'd faced such choices during the war and in the years since. "Does it get easier, taking a life?" Quinn was silent for so long that Willow thought he might not answer. Finally, he said quietly, "No, nor should it. The day it becomes easy is the day you become something you don't want to be." They made camp that night in a sheltered arroyo well off the main trail, foregoing a fire despite the evening chill. Quinn insisted on taking first watch, allowing Willow to rest after the ordeal of the day. Unable to sleep, Willow watched as Quinn sat motionless at the edge of their small camp, his silhouette barely visible against the star-filled sky. There was something reassuring about his vigilance, a steadiness that made her feel protected in a way she hadn't since Thomas fell ill. "You should be sleeping," Quinn said without turning around, somehow aware of her wakefulness. Willow sat up, wrapping her blanket around her shoulders as she moved to join him. "I keep seeing their faces," she admitted, "wondering what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Quinn shifted slightly, making space for her beside him on the rocky ground. "No point in those kinds of thoughts. You can drive yourself mad with what-ifs." "Is that what you did after your family?" A muscle tightened in Quinn's jaw. For a while, spent a few years trying to drink away the memories, didn't work. What did? Time, distance. He glanced at her. Finding purpose again, even if it's just getting through each day. Willow nodded, understanding. After Thomas died, each morning had been a struggle simply to rise and face the emptiness of the day ahead. Does it ever stop hurting? The sharp edge dulls, Quinn answered honestly. But there's always a hollow place where they used to be. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the night sounds of the desert surrounding them, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the whisper of wind through the sparse vegetation. "Thank you," Willow said finally. "Not just for today, but for everything since Hachita. I don't know what I would have done without your help." Quinn's expression softened slightly in the starlight. "You'd have managed," he repeated his earlier assessment. "You're stronger than you know." Willow O'Brien. They reached Socorro the following afternoon without further incident, the small town a welcome sight after the tension of the previous day. Quinn arranged rooms for them at a modest boarding house, then went to report the bandit encounter to the local law while Willow saw to restocking their supplies. That evening, they shared a meal in the boarding house dining room, surrounded by other travelers and local residents. The normalcy of it, sitting at a properly set table, eating food prepared by someone else, felt strangely luxurious after days on the trail. "The sheriff's sending men out to look for those bandits," Quinn informed her as they ate. "Says they might be the same ones who robbed a stagecoach last month." Willow nodded, her mind already turning to the journey ahead. How much further to Santa Fe? 4, maybe 5 days if the weather holds. Quinn studied her across the table. "Your sister expecting you?" "I sent a telegram from Fort Craig," Willow replied. "Though I didn't specify exactly when I'd arrive." Quinn cut a piece of steak, chewing thoughtfully before speaking again. "And after Santa Fe, you have plans?" The question caught Willow off guard. She'd been so focused on simply reaching her destination that she hadn't thought much beyond it. "I suppose I'll look for work. Teaching, perhaps, or in a shop like the one Thomas and I had." "You could do that anywhere," Quinn observed. "I suppose I could." Willow set down her fork, suddenly less interested in her meal. "What about you? Still Colorado?" Quinn nodded, though something in his expression suggested uncertainty. "That's the plan." They fell silent, the conversation around them filling the space between them. Willow found herself studying Quinn's hands, strong, capable hands that had fixed her wagon, guided his horse with subtle commands, and steadied her when she needed support. "We should get an early start tomorrow," Quinn said finally, pushing away his empty plate. "The trail gets rougher north of here." Willow agreed, and they retired to their separate rooms, the strange intimacy of their days on the trail suddenly replaced by the formality of town life. Morning brought clear skies and cooler temperatures, perfect conditions for travel. They left Socorro as planned, the wagon now better supplied and the horses refreshed after their night in proper stables. Quinn seemed more withdrawn than usual, responding to Willow's conversational overtures with polite but brief answers. By midday, she'd given up trying to engage him, focusing instead on the increasingly dramatic landscape as they followed the Rio Grande northward. The river carved its way through rugged country, the trail sometimes running alongside its banks and other times climbing to follow ridgelines high above the water. They made camp earlier than usual that evening, stopping in a grove of cottonwoods beside the river. Quinn busied himself with the horses while Willow prepared their meal, the routine of their partnership now comfortable and familiar. As they sat beside the small fire, eating beans and cornbread warmed in the coals, Quinn finally broke his day-long silence. "I've been thinking," he began, staring into the flames rather than meeting her eyes. "About what happens when we reach Santa Fe." Willow waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "I've wandered a long time," he continued after a moment. "Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Never wanted to after losing everyone." He looked up then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "But these past days, traveling with you, it's reminded me what it's like to have someone to care about, someone who matters." Willow felt her heart quicken, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "Quinn, let me finish," he said gently. "I know you're still grieving your husband. I know Santa Fe means a fresh start for you. But I wanted you to know that if you ever needed someone, if you ever wanted company on whatever road you choose, I'd be there." The simple honesty of his words touched Willow deeply. This man who had literally saved her life, who had asked nothing in return, was offering her something she hadn't dared consider, a future that might include companionship, perhaps even love again. "I don't know what awaits me in Santa Fe," she said carefully, "or what I'll want when I get there. But I'm grateful to know I wouldn't be facing it alone if I chose not to." Quinn nodded, accepting her measured response without pressing for more. They finished their meal in a silence that felt different from the strained quiet of earlier, a silence full of possibility rather than distance. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm of travel and rest, the terrain growing more challenging as they pushed northward. Quinn seemed more at ease now that he'd spoken his mind, their conversations flowing more naturally as they shared stories of their lives before fate had thrown them together. Willow learned about Quinn's childhood in Virginia, about his reluctant service in the Confederate cavalry, about the years after the war when he drifted westward, seeking something he couldn't name. In turn, she told him about growing up the daughter of a schoolteacher in Missouri, about meeting Thomas when he came to buy supplies for his journey west, about their early struggles and eventual success in Hatchita. "He was a good man," Willow said as they discussed Thomas one evening. "Kind, hardworking. We had a partnership and I respected him for that. Many men wouldn't have valued a wife's opinion in business matters." "He was fortunate to have you," Quinn replied, his tone sincere. Willow smiled faintly. "We were fortunate in each other, but—" She hesitated, unsure whether to voice a thought that had been growing in her mind. "But sometimes I wonder if what we had was more companionship than passion. We were comfortable together, but there were no sparks, I suppose you'd say." Quinn considered this. "Some would say comfort is more valuable than sparks in the long run." "Perhaps," Willow acknowledged, "but is it wrong to want both?" Their eyes met across the fire, and for a moment, Willow felt that elusive spark flicker between them, a connection deeper than comfort or convenience or the practical alliance of their journey. Quinn looked away first, clearing his throat. "We should reach Santa Fe by midday tomorrow," he said, changing the subject. "Your sister's husband, what was his name again?" "Oliver Montgomery," Willow replied, allowing the moment to pass. "He owns a dry goods business, but he's also involved in territorial politics from what Caroline writes." Quinn nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Influential man, then? I suppose so." Willow studied Quinn's face in the firelight. "Does that concern you?" he shrugged. "Just wondering where I'll fit in that world, if at all." Willow reached across the space between them, her hand coming to rest lightly on his arm. "Whatever happens in Santa Fe, Quentin Ames, you'll always be the man who helped me when I had nothing left but a wagon full of broken dreams." Quinn's eyes softened at her words, and he covered her hand with his own, the touch sending warmth through her that had nothing to do with the nearby fire. "Get some sleep, Willow," he said gently. "Tomorrow's an important day." They arrived in Santa Fe shortly after noon the next day, the territorial capital sprawling before them in a mix of adobe buildings, broad avenues, and bustling activity that made Hachita seem like little more than an outpost by comparison. Quinn guided them through the streets toward the address Willow had for her sister, his expression growing more reserved with each passing block. The Montgomery home stood on a tree-lined street in one of the more affluent neighborhoods, its whitewashed adobe walls and ornate wooden doors speaking of wealth and social position. Willow felt suddenly conscious of her travel-worn appearance and the humble wagon that contained all her worldly possessions. Quinn brought the wagon to a stop at the front gate, his face unreadable as he surveyed the property. "Quite a place," he commented, helping Willow down from the seat. Before she could respond, the front door opened, and a woman hurried out. Caroline, though so transformed by years and prosperity that Willow barely recognized her sister. Her fashionable dress and carefully arranged hair seemed to belong to a different world than the one Willow had inhabited in Hachita. "Willow!" Caroline exclaimed, embracing her with genuine warmth despite her finery. "We've been so worried since your telegram." "Oliver said the roads have been terribly dangerous lately." "They were," Willow acknowledged, returning her sister's embrace. "I was fortunate to have an escort." She turned to introduce Quinn, who had removed his hat and stood respectfully beside the wagon. "This is Quentin Ames. He's been my guardian angel since Hachita." Caroline assessed Quinn with a quick practiced glance. "How kind of you, Mr. Ames. We're most grateful for your protection of my sister." Quinn nodded politely. "Mrs. Montgomery, it was my privilege." "You must both come inside," Caroline insisted, though her eyes darted somewhat uncertainly to the wagon. "Oliver will want to thank you properly, Mr. Ames and Willow. You must be exhausted after such a journey." As they followed Caroline into the house, Willow was acutely aware of Quinn's discomfort in these refined surroundings. His trail-worn clothes and weathered boots contrasted sharply with the polished floors and fine furnishings of the Montgomery home. Oliver Montgomery proved to be a portly, well-dressed man with the confident manner of someone accustomed to authority. He greeted Willow warmly and thanked Quinn with practiced graciousness, insisting that he stay for dinner. "The least we can do for the man who delivered our Willow safely to us," Oliver declared, signaling a servant to bring refreshments. "And you must tell us all about your adventures on the trail." The hours that followed were uncomfortable for Willow, caught between the obvious luxury of her sister's life and Quinn's increasing reticence, as the social gulf between them became more apparent. Though Caroline and Oliver were unfailingly polite to Quinn, there was a subtle condescension in their manner that made Willow's cheeks burn with embarrassment. As evening approached, Quinn declined the offer to stay for dinner, citing the need to find accommodation for himself and his horse. "Nonsense," Oliver said dismissively. "We have a small guest house that's perfectly suitable. You'll stay there tonight at least, I insist." Quinn glanced at Willow, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, not wanting him to leave just yet, though she sensed his growing desire to escape the confines of Montgomery hospitality. "That's very generous," Quinn conceded. "Thank you." That night, after a dinner during which Quinn said little while Oliver dominated the conversation with talk of territorial politics and business opportunities, Willow slipped out to the guest house. She found Quinn sitting on the small porch, staring up at the star-filled sky. "I'm sorry about Oliver," she said without preamble, settling onto the step beside him. "He can be overwhelming." Quinn's smile held no rancor. "He's a man who knows his place in the world, can't fault him for that." "This isn't my world either," Willow felt compelled to explain. "I was raised much more simply than this." "But it could be your world now," Quinn observed. "Your sister and her husband clearly want to help you establish yourself here." Willow thought of the conversation at dinner, Oliver's offer to set her up in a small millinery shop, Caroline's excitement about introducing her to the right people in Santa Fe society. It was a generous offer, a chance at security after the uncertainty of the past weeks. Yes, she acknowledged. They've been very kind. Quinn studied her face in the moonlight. But I'm not sure it's what I want. Willow surprised herself with the admission. All through dinner, listening to Oliver talk about his business associates and Caroline's stories about their social engagements. I kept thinking about our nights by the campfire, about how real those conversations felt compared to this. Quinn was silent for a long moment. What are you saying, Willow? She took a deep breath. I'm saying that I've had time to consider what you said a few nights ago. About being there if I ever wanted company on whatever road I choose. Hope flickered in Quinn's eyes, quickly tempered with caution. Your sister and her husband can offer you security, respectability, a place in society. And what could you offer me? Willow asked softly. Quinn's gaze didn't waver. Honesty, partnership, a life that might not be easy or settled but would be ours to shape together. He paused. And yes, those sparks you mentioned. Willow felt her heart quicken at the simple truth of his words. When do you leave for Colorado? I was thinking of heading out tomorrow, Quinn replied. Seemed like you'd be settled here and he hesitated. I'm not sure I belong in this particular picture. What if I came with you? The words were out before Willow could second-guess them, but once spoken, she knew they were right. Quinn's expression shifted from surprise to cautious hope. You'd leave all this. The security your sister is offering, security isn't the same as happiness, Willow said simply. These past 2 weeks with you, despite all the danger and hardship, I've felt more alive than I have in years. More myself. Quinn reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. It won't be an easy life, Willow. I don't need easy, she replied, squeezing his hand. I just need real. The following morning, Willow faced her sister across the breakfast table, her decision made but the words difficult to find. You're not staying, are you? Caroline asked perceptively, setting down her teacup. Willow shook her head. I'm grateful for your offer, Caroline, truly. But I need to find my own way. Caroline glanced toward the window where Quinn could be seen readying his horse in the courtyard. With him? Yes, Willow answered simply. With him. To her surprise, a small smile touched Caroline's lips. I thought as much. The way you look at each other, it reminds me of how Oliver and I were when we first met. You're not angry. Caroline reached across the table to take her sister's hand. I want you to be happy, Willow. I thought that meant security, a place in society, the things that make me happy. But we're different women. Thank you for understanding, Willow said, relieved. Oliver won't be pleased, Caroline warned. He's already made inquiries about that shop. I'll speak with him, Willow promised. And we won't leave until tomorrow. I'd like one more day with you to really catch up after all these years. The sisters spent the day together, Caroline helping Willow select a few new dresses and practical items for her journey, while Willow shared stories of her life in Hatchita and the adventure that had brought her to Santa Fe. Oliver, when informed of Willow's decision, was predictably disapproving but eventually conceded that she had the right to choose her own path. Quinn, meanwhile, gathered supplies and information about the trail to Colorado, returning to the Montgomery home in the evening with news of a cattle drive heading north in 2 days. The trail boss is an old acquaintance, he explained over dinner, more at ease now that his role in Willow's life was clear. Says he can use another experienced hand, and there's a place for you with the cook wagon if you're willing to help with meals. I'm willing, Willow confirmed, ignoring Oliver's barely concealed dismay at the thought of his sister-in-law working as a trail cook. They departed Santa Fe early the next morning. Willow's wagon now lightened of some possessions she'd left with Caroline, but enriched by the carefully selected new items that would serve her well in the life ahead. Quinn rode beside her, his face more relaxed than she'd seen it since they entered the city. "Second thoughts?" he asked as the road curved, giving them a last view of Santa Fe spread out below. Willow shook her head, feeling a sense of rightness in her decision. "None. You?" Quinn's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that warmed Willow's heart. "Only that I wish I'd met you sooner." "We met exactly when we were supposed to," she replied. "Not a moment too early or too late." The cattle drive proved to be exactly the transition Willow needed, a community of sorts, with the structure of daily work but the freedom of constant movement. She quickly adapted to life on the trail, earning the respect of the cowboys with her cooking skills and her willingness to work hard without complaint. Quinn, too, seemed to find a renewed purpose in the routine of the drive, his natural leadership and trail experience making him a valued member of the crew. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, he and Willow would find moments to be alone together, their relationship deepening with each passing day. "The foreman offered me a permanent position at the ranch in Colorado," Quinn told her one evening as they sat by a small fire, slightly apart from the main camp. "Said they need experienced men who can train younger hands." "That sounds promising," Willow replied, watching his face in the firelight. "Is it something you'd want?" Quinn was quiet for a moment, considering. "I've been thinking that maybe it's time to stop drifting, find a place to build something lasting." Willow felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "What sort of something?" "A home," Quinn said simply. "A life with roots. With you, if that's what you want too." Instead of answering immediately, Willow leaned forward and kissed him, their first kiss, though it felt as natural as breathing. Quinn's hand came up to cradle her face, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew those hands possessed. "I'll take that as a yes," he murmured when they finally parted, his eyes bright with emotion. "A definite yes," Willow confirmed, her heart fuller than she'd thought possible after all the loss she'd endured. They reached the ranch in Colorado in early June, the high mountain valley green with spring growth and alive with wildflowers. The main house stood on a low rise overlooking pastureland that stretched toward distant peaks still capped with snow. Outbuildings and corrals clustered nearby, the whole spread speaking of prosperity and careful management. The ranch owner, a widow named Alina Daniels, welcomed Quinn warmly and extended that welcome to Willow when she learned of their situation. "We've been short-handed since my husband passed last year," Alina explained as she showed them to a small cabin that had once housed the ranch foreman. "The previous foreman left to start his own place, and I've been making do with temporary help. If you're half as competent as Jake claims, Mr. Ames, you'd be a godsend." Quinn glanced at Willow, seeking her approval before committing them both to this new life. She nodded slightly, already feeling at home in this beautiful valley. "We'd be honored to help, Mrs. Daniels," Quinn replied. "And please call me Quinn." The following weeks were busy ones as Quinn took on the responsibilities of ranch foreman and Willow found her own place in the community. She began by helping in the ranch house, but soon discovered a need for a schoolteacher in the growing settlement nearby. With Alina's encouragement, Willow opened a small school in a vacant building on the edge of town, drawing students from the surrounding ranches and farms. By August, they had settled into a rhythm of work and home life that suited them both. Quinn thrived in his role managing the ranch, his natural leadership earning the respect of the cowboys under his direction. Willow found purpose in her teaching, while also creating a true home in their small cabin, which Quinn steadily improved with additions and refinements in his spare time. On a warm evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Quinn took Willow's hand in his. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he began, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his voice. "I know we've been living as partners these past months, but I'd like to make it official if you would." Willow smiled at his hesitation. "Are you asking me to marry you, Quentin Ames?" "I am," he confirmed, producing a simple gold band from his pocket. "I know it's plain, but it's perfect," Willow interrupted, extending her hand so he could slip the ring onto her finger. "And yes, I will marry you." Quinn's face broke into a rare, unguarded smile as he leaned forward to seal their engagement with a kiss. When they parted, Willow rested her head against his shoulder, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You remember what you said to me that first day in Hatchita?" she asked softly. "When you unhitched the horses from my wagon?" Quinn nodded, his arm tightening around her. "I said we start again." "I thought you were just talking about the wagon," Willow admitted. "But you were talking about life, weren't you?" "I suppose I was," Quinn agreed, though I had no idea then how true those words would become for both of us. They were married in October, with the aspens glowing gold against the mountainsides and the first hint of winter in the air. Eleanor Daniels hosted the celebration at the ranch, the entire community turning out to wish them well. Even Caroline and Oliver made the journey from Santa Fe, bringing gifts and, more importantly, Caroline's genuine happiness for her sister's choice. "He looks at you like you're the sunrise after the longest night," Caroline observed as they watched Quinn talking with some of the ranch hands. "I was wrong to doubt your decision. We both had to find our own paths," Willow replied, squeezing her sister's hand. "Yours led to Santa Fe, mine led here." "To think it all began with a broken wagon wheel," Caroline marveled. Willow smiled, remembering the despair she'd felt that morning in Hatchita, standing beside a wagon that contained the remnants of a life she thought was over. Sometimes the end of one journey is just the beginning of another. In the years that followed, Quinn and Willow built a life that neither could have imagined on that dusty road from Hatchita. The small cabin grew into a proper home as Quinn added rooms to accommodate their expanding family. First a daughter, Sarah, born in the spring of their second year of marriage. Then twin boys, James and William, who arrived 18 months later to complete their family. The ranch prospered under Quinn's management, eventually becoming their own when Eleanor Daniels, childless herself, sold them the property at a price well below its value. Considerate payment for giving an old woman peace of mind in her final years, she insisted when Quinn protested the generosity of her terms. Willow's school grew as well, eventually moving to a purpose-built building in town where she trained other teachers, her reputation for excellence drawing students from throughout the region. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Quinn surprised Willow with a special gift, a small, ornately carved wooden wagon, perfect in every detail down to the miniature horses hitched to its front. "To remember where we started," he explained as she turned the delicate creation in her hands. "As if I could ever forget," Willow replied, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That wagon full of broken dreams turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me." Quinn drew her into his arms, the silver now prominent in his dark hair catching the light as he leaned down to kiss her. "To new beginnings," he murmured against her lips. "And to the journey that never really ends," Willow added, her heart full with the knowledge that their greatest adventure had been finding each other amid the vast wilderness of the West, proving that even in the most desolate moments, hope could take root and flourish into a love that would last a lifetime. As the sun set behind the mountains, they now called home, casting long shadows across the land they had tamed together. Willow thought of all the twists and turns their path had taken. From a widow with nothing but a wagon of possessions and fading hopes, to a woman blessed with love, family, and purpose. It had been a journey she could never have foreseen that day in Unhitched, when a quiet cowboy had looked at her broken wagon and seen not an ending, but a beginning. "We start again," Quinn had said then, words that had proven prophetic in ways neither could have imagined. And they had started again, building something stronger and more beautiful than either had dared to dream possible in that moment of first meeting. Together, they had written a new story, not one of broken dreams, but of dreams fulfilled beyond measure.